Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Kings chapter 12. This is going to be part 2. And let me pull up my thing again. What we're going through here is the divide of the kingdom. Let me show you quickly. This is a breakdown of the kings. The kings of Israel and Judah, and we're studying right now why this list came about, why this division came about. The northern kingdoms of Israel. Right now we're going to see Jeroboam, and then Rehoboam, who is the son of Solomon. Rehoboam is going to be the one who called this division. So as we move now through 1st and 2nd Kings, this is the division that we're going to see back and forth. Now when we move, I believe it's at some point, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. 1st Chronicles deals with David's kingdom. First Chronicles, I believe deals with David's reign, and then Second Chronicles deal with the division. Okay, and as I said, First and Second Kings focuses primarily on the northern kingdoms, but we will see this a going back and forth of the kings, and then when we get to First and Second, when we get to Second Chronicles, we'll see the same kind of kings. However, the focus would be more on the kings of Judah, and then of course a going back and forth of these kings. And then what is sad is this division. This split happened all the way up into this division will last all the way up into the Babylonian Empire. I mean, when the invasion, and then after that you don't see the division again. Of course, after the Babylonian invasion, Israel is never again a freestanding nation. And what I mean by that they will always be under the rule of one of the world kingdoms. So Babylon, the Babylonian kingdom, Median Persians, the Grecians, the Romans, and even today, even though they are a freestanding kingdom, they do so with the aid of the allies, like the United States. So if they did not have the allies, the Arabs would pounce on them if they could. Okay, all right. So so this is right now in chapter 12. What we're reading is why why this division happened, and it is because of foolishness. All right, so I'm going to start with verse 1 again and read on. It says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. Now, Rehoboam, and again, so you have to remember the difference, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and Jeroboam is just a guy whom God appointed ruler over these northern kingdoms. When Solomon found out, because the prophet prophesied to him, Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam. He fled to Egypt, and now that Solomon is dead, he reemerges. But he also reemerges, of course, to fulfill the prophecy. Verse 2: When Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard about it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon's presence, Jeroboam stayed in Egypt. They summoned him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. Interesting that he would come with Israel. This is in keeping with the prophecy that God has spoke to him. Verse 4: Your father made our yoke difficult. Ye therefore lighten your father's harsh service. Now keep that in mind. Notice this, your father's harsh service. Now, what is interesting, the people, remember, they didn't Solomon didn't care about how they what they thought. He didn't care about it. One, God had established the kingdom in him. It wouldn't be to the latter years that he fell into. Some people say backslid, but he fell hard into idolatry. And then, of course, the kingdom was even worse under that rule. He said, if you therefore lighten your father's harsh service and the heavy yoke he put upon us, and we will serve you. This is wisdom here that Rehoboam, and he is such a fool because he would have had such a great kingdom. Verse 5. Rehoboam replied, go home for 3 days and then return to me. So the people left. Then King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was young, asking, how do you advise me to respond to these people? Rehoboam kind of reminds me of Adoniah. Remember, he was feeling himself and sat on the throne. He's got all these people around him. He goes, hey, you tell me what you think, and you tell me what you think, and all that. Now, remember, so some of the leaders who were around with his father. Now, remember, his father just passed away, so this is not a long period of time. Okay, and they remember those days. Verse 7. They replied, today, if you will be a servant to these people and serve them, and if you respond to them by speaking kind words to them, they will be your servants forever. This is wisdom here, right? And that said, many politicians today haven't. They still don't, even in our nation. I'm going to put it like this: most politicians, in my opinion, are fools. They don't. They only seek to serve themselves. They're not really seeking to serve the people. You cannot think about this. And again, I'm going to just indulge myself for just 1 second. Whenever they have this big budget, you know what happens with politicians? They call it pork. They start putting their own thing in. So let's have a big climate thing, and yet all these politicians go, oh yeah, we'll vote for the climate thing, but here's our list of all the other stuff that they want in. Anyway, I digress. Verse 8. But he rejected the advice of the elders who had advised him and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and served him. Now remember, he's 41 at the time, but he grew up privileged. See, he doesn't feel the pain of the people. He's privileged. Okay? And he asked them, what message do you advise that we send back to these people who said to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him told him, this is what you should say to these people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. This is what you should tell them. My little finger is thicker than my father's lawns. Although my father burdened you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with barbed wires. What a fool. Tyrants never last in their kingdom. Verse 12. So Jeroboam and all of the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had ordered. Return to me on this 3rd day. And then the king answered the people harshly. He rejected the advice of the elders had given him, and he spoke to them according to the young men's advice. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed wires. So instead of them saying, yes, king, verse 15, the king did not listen to the people, because this turn of events came from the Lord to carry out his word, which he has spoken through Ahijah the Shilonite, and to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And when all of the Israelites saw that the king had not listened to them, and the people answered him. Now before I get to this, now there's a kind of a third point of view here, and that is God's point of view. And when you see something like this, what's kind of interesting is, how do you read this? In other words, did God harden their hearts? Or when I say harden their hearts, he certainly hardened their hearts. But did God make Israel or Rehoboam do this? That Rehoboam had no control? And I would say that we can look at that God is using their foolishness against them. And we're going to see this a lot. That God uses the foolishness in his counsel. In other words, he already spoke this, but now he's going to use these fools to carry out his decree. Verse 16, when all of Israel saw that the king had not listened to the people, the people answered him, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Israel, return to your tents. David, now look after your own house. So Israel went to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the Israelites living in Judea. Okay. So this was, again, a civil war, a rebellion. Okay. Verse 18. The king Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the, now get this, forced labor. In other words, Rehoboam is still going to try to collect taxes. He's still going to try to make them work under harsh labor. But all of Israel stoned him to death, and King Rehoboam managed to get into the chariot and flee to Jerusalem. And Israel is in rebellion against the house of David until this day. Now again, we see this phrase. We're talking about what does he mean into in rebellion until this day. What does he mean by that? Okay. In terms of the time frame of the writing, or whoever the writer was. Now again, this is I'm always amazed at this because, and I think about that. What a fool, right? This is why I'm saying this. What a fool! He could have had a great kingdom, and instead he listened to he let his homies puff up his ego, and that's what this is. Now, in my opinion, I think what you have right here is he grew up privileged, and as a result, he grew up privileged, and so he had no common ground with the people. He didn't, All right, so verse 20, when all of Israel heard that Jeroboam had come back, they summoned him to the assembly and made him king over Israel. No one followed the house of David except the tribe of Judah alone. Now, Levi, remember, is not counted as a tribe. When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mobilized 180,000 choice warriors from the entire house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin to fight against the house of Israel to restore the kingdom of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. Let me make a correction right here too. Benjamin and Judah will follow King David. Verse 22, but a revelation from God came to Shemaiah, the man of God. This is the one who prophesied to Jeroboam that he was going to be king over the northern kingdoms. It says, say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, the whole house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, this is what the Lord says. You are not to march up and fight against your brothers, the Israelites. Each one of you must return home, for I have done this. So they listened to what the Lord said and went back as he had told them. And thank God, I guess they listened. Now, as we move on, we're going to see some of these fools won't listen, but at least he did. But it was a shame, had he listened in the first place, he wouldn't have incurred this great loss. But anyway, verse 25, Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and he lived there. And from there he went out and built Peniel. Jeroboam said to himself, the way things are going now, the kingdom might return to the house of David if these people regularly go to offer sacrifices in the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. The hearts of these people will return to the Lord and Rehoboam, the king of Judah. They will murder me and go back to the king of Judah. So the king sought advice. Then he made 2 golden calves. Now, right now, yes, unbelievable. The unbelief of Israel, and I will always say this, is unbelievable. Here is Jeroboam, who was a nobody, who God appoints, who God's deliver more than half of the Israel over to them. And notice his mindset here. This great sin here, think about this now. And at this time, they've had almost 1,000 years to recollect why this is bad. And remember, you had a prophet of God speak to Jeroboam. Then he made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people going to Jerusalem, it is too difficult for you. Going to Jerusalem is too difficult for you, Israel. Here is your God who brought you out of the land of Israel. Saying the same thing that they said in that wilderness remember, they went 3 months out of Egypt, they said this, remember. He set up one in Bethel and other one in Dan. This led to sin. In other words, you see that this right here plunged the people in idolatry. And the people walked in procession before one of the calves all the way to Dan. Jeroboam also built shrines in high places. He set up priests from every class of people who were not Levites. This guy is just really unbelievable right here, right? He just, God's way, forget it. Jeroboam made a festival in the 8th month and the 15th day of the month, like the festivals in Judah. He offered sacrifices. Now, you notice he kept the people's attention away. In other words, he kept the festival on the same day so that what? The people won't wander back to Jerusalem. In other words, his whole thing was to keep them out of Judah. He offered sacrifices on the altars. He made this offering in Bethel and sacrificed to the calves he had set up. He also stationed the priests in Bethel for the high places he had set up. Now remember, these high places were high elevated lands. Okay? And the pagan way of thinking is that the higher up you get, the closer you are to the heavens, the closer you are to the God. Verse 33, he offered sacrifices on altars he set up in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month. He chose this month on his own. He made a festival for Israel, for the Israelites, offered sacrifice on the altar and burned incense. So Jeroboam is, and by the way, he kind of sets the standard of sin. We're going to see this as we move through, the kings. He sets the standard, and then the next person, like Ahab, would be, well, Ahab is worse, and so he sets the standard. His bar is lower till you get to Manasseh, who would be the worst king of all. Okay, the absolute worst king of all. But unbelievable. Again, it's unbelievable that he just totally forsook the Lord, who had put him in this place of kingship. He totally just rebelled against that. And of course, as we're going to see how God will deal with him, we'll deal with that in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I welcome all of your comments. I'll see you in the next study. All right.